Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laik Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. In the previous parts, we did something that almost no cosmology does. We refused to begin with space. We refused to begin with time. We refused to begin with matter, energy, fields, or particles. We refused even to begin with the usual word exists, as if it were obvious. We kept removing everything that could be removed, and we kept asking again and again, what must be true for anything to be speakable, testable, shareable, and reconstructible? What we found is phi. But I must say it carefully, because the first danger is the oldest smuggling attempt. The moment you hear a symbol, your mind wants it to be an object, a thing, a substance, a field, a secret material, a cosmic fluid, a hidden energy, a mental essence, a god behind the gods. And that temptation is exactly what we are firewalled against. Phi is not a new thing inside the world. Phi is the silent permission that makes thing, world, and even inside meaningful. The unavoidable opening, the first permission. Before anything can be anything, before a single claim can be formed, before a single measurement can be performed, there must be the primitive possibility that this could be different from that. Not the difference itself, not the event of separation, not the appearance of contrast, the permission for contrast. Imagine you enter a room so perfectly uniform that nothing can be picked out. No light, no sound, no texture, no change. Not even a corner, not even near or far. If everything is perfectly the same, then nothing can be identified, not because it is hidden, but because identification is impossible. Now imagine the tiniest crack in that uniformity, not yet a thing, not yet a feature, but the possibility that uniformity could be broken. That possibility is already a kind of structure, a permission, a can. That can is phi. Here is the simplest way to hold it. Phi is primitive comparability, the first permission for same versus different, the first condition for any distinction to even make sense. This is why phi is not optional. Every statement you can make relies on it, including statements that pretend not to. Say, everything is one. You use the distinction one versus many. Say, nothing exists. You use the distinction exists versus not exists. Say, all is illusion. You use the distinction illusion versus non-illusion. Say, words cannot describe reality. You use the distinction words versus reality. The foundation is so deep that even denial stands on it. That is not a rhetorical trick. That is the structural reality of what making a claim means. This is our first firewall. If a proposed foundation can be questioned using meaningful oppositions, exist, not, real, unreal, true, false, then it already presupposes phi. And that brings us immediately to the next point. Before exists the pre-ontological ground. Most foundations begin with being, with existence, with there is. But the question, does it exist, already uses comparability. It already assumes the split between is and is not. It already assumes the possibility of separating one option from another. So phi is prior to existence talk. Not prior in time, as if phi happened earlier on a cosmic clock. Prior in logic. Prior in the grammar of meaning. You cannot meaningfully ask, does phi exist, in the way you ask, does this chair exist? Because the chair is a candidate inside the world of distinctions, while phi is what makes candidate, inside, and world meaningful categories at all. This is our second firewall. Do not treat phi as an item in inventory. It is the condition that makes inventories possible. A powerful analogy. Try to define the word word without using words. You will fail. Not because you're not clever, but because definition itself is a word act. Any attempt to step behind the medium must use the medium. That is what pre-ontological means here. Phi is not an entity that answers the question. Phi is what makes the question coherent. Capacity, not event. The great separation. Now we install one of the most important conceptual separations in the whole program. Phi is not difference. Phi is the capacity for difference. If you miss this, everything collapses into confusion. If you treat phi as the differences we see, then you have already jumped into the differentiated world and called it the ground. That is the exact smuggling we are avoiding. Think of a blank canvas. The canvas is not the painting, but without the canvas, painting cannot happen. Think of an alphabet. The alphabet is not a story, but without the alphabet, stories cannot be written, shared, or checked. Think of a musical scale. The scale is not the song, but without the scale, the song cannot have recognizable intervals. Phi is like that. Phi is the silent enabling space, the can behind every is. Here the prediction becomes clear. Prediction. Any later physical quantity, energy, momentum, field amplitude, particle number, will not replace phi. It will be an expression inside phi's permission structure, a specialized way distinctions become stable and shareable. And the falsification challenge is equally clear. Falsification. Produce a measurable phenomenon that can be defined, compared, and replicated without relying anywhere on distinguishable states. If you can do that, phi as primitive comparability is false. But notice the trap. The moment you say measurable, you have already invoked distinction. A measurement is a difference that survives a comparator procedure. If there is no difference, there is no reading. If there is no reading, there is no public claim. The relational revolution. Only differences speak. Once you accept phi as comparability, a deep consequence follows that changes the meaning of truth. Absolute phi values are operationally meaningless. Only relations can be public. Why? Because measurement is comparison. Every measurement, no matter how advanced, compares a system to a reference, an instrument baseline, a standard, a prior state, a known template. Even when we pretend we are measuring an absolute, we are measuring a relation to an implicit reference that we forgot to confess. Imagine everyone in the world grows taller by exactly the same amount overnight. Would anyone notice? Not if all rulers grew too. You would still measure the same heights because your standard shifted with you. That is the point. The absolute is not accessible because access itself is comparative. This is not a weakness of our technology. It is a structural statement about the meaning of public claims. So we install the gauge relational essence. Only what is invariant under allowed redescriptions can be publicly certified. You can rename your coordinate origin. You can shift your reference phase. You can recalibrate your 0 point. A public fact must survive these harmless shifts. If it changes when you change conventions, then it wasn't a fact. It was a coordinate choice. This is where gauge stops being a technical physics word and becomes a foundational necessity. Prediction. No experiment will ever detect absolute phi independent of reference. All certified observables will be relational invariants. Falsification. Build a device that outputs the absolute phase of the universe in a way that remains meaningful and reproducible when all observers change their reference conventions, and can be verified without comparison. That would break the relational claim. But verification itself is comparison, so the falsification attempt reveals the structure. The absolute cannot enter public science. The public carrier, sharing without cheating. If only relations matter, how does phi ever become accessible to a community of observers? Through carriers, encodings that survive translation and reference shifts. A sunset is private. You can point at it, but later it is gone. So you take a photograph. The photograph is not the sunset, but it is a stable carrier that allows another person, later, elsewhere, to reconstruct something about what you saw. Money is another carrier. The paper is not value. Value is relational. But the paper carries a stable mark that a community can use to reconstruct a relation. This amount buys that bread, pays that rent, equals that wage. In weaving, the pattern chart is not the carpet, but it is what allows two weavers in different villages to produce the same design. If one weaver renames colors, the chart still carries the structure. So phi becomes publicly accessible only through gauge clean carriers, encodings that are stable under allowed redescriptions. They let different observers reconstruct the same claim without sharing the same private viewpoint. This is a key methodological firewall. If a claim cannot be carried through stable encodings and reconstructed by others, it is not public science. It is private narrative. The loop of reality. Cyclic closure as minimal, non-trivial structure. Now comes a move that sounds like mathematics, but is really a constraint emerging from everything we have already said. If phi is a capacity for distinction, and if absolutes are unobservable, and if public facts must be invariant under reference shifts, then the value space of phi, when it becomes representable, wants to be compact and cyclic. Why cyclic? Because a circle is the minimal non-trivial compact structure that supports variation without smuggling in an unlicensed infinity. Consider three options. A point. No variation, no distinction. Too trivial. A line. Non-compact. It runs off to infinity and brings with it an undeclared primitive. A circle. Compact, closed, finite in extent, yet non-trivial in variation. On a circle, if you go around, you return exactly. Not approximately, exactly. That exactness matters because it produces invariance. Whole number counts of how many times you wrapped. Winding numbers. Closure counts. Integers that cannot be smoothed away by small perturbations. This is how discreteness can later appear without being smuggled in as a primitive. Closure forces whole numbers. This gives a strong prediction. Whenever later physics contains quantization, discrete allowed values, it will trace back to closure invariants of this kind, not as an added rule, but as a topological consequence of looping structure. And the falsification challenge? Derive fundamental quantization in a framework that contains no closure invariants anywhere. No loops, no holonomy, no winding, without smuggling discreteness in through other hidden assumptions. Patchwork universe. Local clarity, global stitching. But a circle alone is not the end of the story, because once you accept closure, another truth becomes unavoidable. Global description may require patchwork. You cannot cover a sphere with one smooth coordinate chart without singularities. That is not a flaw of cartography, it is a fact about global structure. So you use an atlas, multiple local maps with overlap rules that tell you how to translate between them. Phi may be like that, locally smooth, locally coherent, yet globally requiring multiple consistent patches. Reality can be locally readable while globally non-trivial. This is not brokenness, it is structural richness, and it prepares something you will later recognize in physics. The appearance of defects, holonomy, and you come back changed after looping through a region, not because anything violated local rules, but because global stitching carries information. Prediction. Many strange features of later physics will not be dynamical mysteries, but topological facts of how local descriptions must be stitched. Falsification. Prove that a single global description of phi must exist everywhere with no patching in any coherent universe, while still allowing non-trivial structure. If you can, patchwork necessity fails. No pre-installed spacetime. Events first, coordinates later. Now we remove the deepest smuggling move of all, assuming spacetime as the container in which phi lives. We do not begin with where and when. We begin with can be distinguished. The domain of phi is not assumed to be spacetime. Spacetime is a later organization we read out from phi's relational patterns. Imagine you find a box of photographs with no timestamps, no GPS tags, no order, just images, events. Later, you reconstruct a timeline from clues. This child is younger here, older there. This building is under construction in one photo, finished in another. This car appears after that accident. You reconstruct before and after. You also reconstruct near and far from background continuity and causal contact. The timeline was not given. It was inferred from patterns. So it is here. Where and when are derived labels, not primitive scaffolding. This is a crucial firewall. Any foundation that assumes spacetime as primitive has already assumed the very stage it claims to derive. Local coherence. Why description is possible at all. But if we remove spacetime as stage, we must still explain why science is possible, why finite description works. For that, we require local coherence, smoothness in the operational sense. Not gentle motion, but enough consistency that neighboring regions are not completely unrelated. If every point were independent, describing even a small region would require infinite information. No compression would be possible. No model would be possible. No reconstruction would be possible. Local coherence means reality is compressible locally. Finite data can capture it to some usable order. This is why approximations work, why equations can exist, why we can build instruments whose readings are stable enough to share. Here the prediction is concrete. In every successful experimental domain, there will be a coherence threshold. Below it, claims fail to replicate because the pattern is not licensable. Above it, stable structure emerges. And falsification. Falsification. Produce stable public science from completely incoherent windows. Claims that replicate with no coherence floor, no signal-to-noise threshold. If you can, the coherence licensing idea fails. Infinite depth, finite access. The human condition made structural. Now comes the breathtaking tension at the heart of the silent ground. Phi has infinite descriptive depth in principle. There can be derivatives upon derivatives, finer structure upon finer structure, an infinite jet potential. But observers are finite. Instruments have finite resolution. Communities have finite time. Communication channels have finite bandwidth. So even if reality's depth is bottomless, the public slice we can extract is finite. This is not a temporary technological limitation. It is structural. Public knowledge requires finite procedures and finite encodings. A claim that requires infinite output cannot be shared, cannot be verified, cannot be reconstructed. So we get the fundamental condition: infinite potential, finite certified access. And from that emerges a powerful prediction. Adding higher order detail will improve prediction only up to a coherence limited ceiling. Beyond that, you are fitting noise, not extracting structure. This protects against a common pathology, the fantasy that infinite complexity is automatically deeper truth. In science, complexity without operational licensing is just narrative freedom. Absolutes are structurally unobservable, not hard, impossible. At this point, the relational stance becomes an impossibility result. Absolute phi is not merely difficult to measure, it is structurally unmeasurable. Because measurement requires comparison. Comparison kills absolutes. And verification requires comparison again, across observers and times. So if someone claims, I measured the absolute phase of the universe, the firewall response is not, prove it harder. The firewall response is, explain how your procedure avoids reference dependence, avoids hidden standards, and remains reconstructible by others. If it cannot, it is not a public claim. This is the deep reason only differences speak. The absolute is silent in the public world. No intrinsic dynamics. Grammar before story. Now we arrive at the quietest point of all. Undifferentiated phi has no built-in dynamics, no preferred evolution law, no arrow of time hidden inside it, no cosmic script. It is grammar, not story. A grammar does not tell you which sentence must be written, but it tells you what counts as a sentence. It sets the space of possible narratives. It defines what can be expressed, what can be checked, what can be shared. Similarly, undifferentiated phi sets the permission structure for laws, but it does not choose a particular law in advance. That is essential for a clean foundation. If you install dynamics too early, you smuggle time and evolution before earning them. You move from permission to outcome without justification. So we keep the ground silent. Dynamics will come later, when differentiation begins. Not as magic, but as an earned handoff. Before time and space, before mind and matter, before stuff. At this level, time and space are not containers. They are readings we will later extract from structure change. The words before and after are not primitive. They will be derived in the differentiated stage. Likewise, mind and matter are not the original split. Phi precedes that division. Both the thought and the rock are distinguishable patterns. Both are expressible in the grammar of comparability. Their difference will later be a difference in stability, coupling, and self-reference, not a difference of two unrelated foundations. And most crucially, phi is not substance. If you treat phi as stuff, you immediately trigger regress. How much? Where? With what units? Made of what? Those questions presuppose measure, location, and composition, distinctions that phi is supposed to ground. So substance talk at the foundation is a category mistake. Phi is what makes stuff talk possible. It is not itself stuff. Logic, information, objectivity, truth, ethics. One spine. Now we see something that should make your spine straighten. Phi is not only the root of physics talk, it is the root of reason talk. Logic presupposes identity and difference. Inference requires the ability to treat two expressions as equivalent or not equivalent. Contradiction requires distinguishing true from false. Without comparability, reasoning collapses. Information is the same. One bit is one controlled distinction. No distinction means no message, no code, no entropy, no computation. Objectivity emerges when multiple observers can make the same distinction under shared procedures and get consistent outcomes. Objectivity is not view from nowhere. It is intersubjective stability under reconstructible comparison. Truth then becomes operational, what survives repeated, scoped, disciplined comparison across observers and times. Not private certainty, not metaphysical decoration, survival under reconstruction. And from that, an ethical imperative follows that is not optional morality, but structural responsibility. If meaningful public claims require comparability and reconstruction, then refusing comparability while demanding trust is epistemic coercion. It is the leader who says, "Trust me," but refuses audits. It is the company that says, "Safe," but hides tests. It is the prophet who says, "True," but forbids verification. So the moral spine is simple: no verification, no authority. That is not ideology. That is what it means for claims to be public. The necessity. Without phi, no world. Now we come to the final thread of Part 48's weave. If phi is the permission for distinction, then a reality without phi would be a reality in which nothing can be distinguished from anything else. But a reality in which nothing is distinguishable is operationally indistinguishable from nothing at all. And notice the deeper lock. Even to imagine a reality without phi, you must distinguish that imagined reality from the reality with phi. The attempt uses phi, so phi is unavoidable, not as dogma, as a necessity condition for coherent talk. This gives us the sharpest prediction. Any coherent cosmogenesis, any account of a readable universe, will require no deeper primitive than this permission structure. Any proposal of the true foundation beneath phi will either reintroduce phi-like distinctions in disguise or lose public testability. And it gives us a clean falsification challenge. Produce a coherent, publicly testable foundational primitive X that grounds science without using any distinction concepts. No sameness, no difference, no identity, no comparison, while still preserving reconstructible measurement. If you can, phi is not the ground. But if X cannot be spoken without distinction, it smuggles phi. And if it cannot be tested without distinction, it is operationally mute. That is the lock. The whole picture as one tapestry. So what is undifferentiated phi in the full breathtaking picture from part 3 through part 23? It is the silent ground, the primal permission for comparability. It is pre-ontological, before exists, because existence talk already uses it. It is capacity, not event, the blank canvas, not the painting. It is relational only. Absolutes are scientifically silent. Only invariants can be public. It becomes public only through gauge-clean carriers, stable encodings that survive translation. Its minimal representable value space is cyclic closure. Reality wraps, and closure seeds integers. Its global description may require patches, local maps stitched consistently, making topology real. It does not presuppose spacetime. Spacetime will be read out, not assumed. Where it is readable, it must be locally coherent, otherwise science is impossible. It is bottomless in potential depth, but finite in public access, so prediction has ceilings. It contains no intrinsic dynamics, grammar before story. It is prior to time-space and prior to mind-matter. Both are later differentiations. It is not substance, because stuff concepts presuppose what phi enables. It grounds logic and information. Reason and bits begin with distinction. It grounds objectivity and truth. Public knowledge is reconstructible comparison. And it implies an ethics. If you claim publicly, you must allow comparison publicly. Finally, it is necessary for any readable world. Without it, there is no world in a public sense. We are not done yet. Let us continue our pattern weaving in the next part. 49. Always peace be upon you.